15 years after becoming a global legend, Michael Jordan received a late-night call from his daughter Emma that forced him to face a pain no championship could prepare him for. The heartbreaking truth that behind his success was a family member silently carrying years of pain, unanswered questions, and a longing to finally be seen and loved. Michael Jordan had experienced moments in life when the entire world was watching him. He had stood in front of millions of people, taken the final shot with everything on the line, and carried the pressure of an entire city on his shoulders. He knew what it felt like to face fear. He knew what it felt like to be judged. But nothing prepared him for a phone call from his daughter on a quiet night that would change the way he saw his own family forever. It was late in the evening, and Michael was sitting alone in his office. The room was filled with memories from different chapters of his life: championship trophies, old photographs, and reminders of the career that made him a legend. But behind all those achievements was something much more important to him: his family. He had always believed that no matter how busy life became, his children would always know how much he loved them. Then his phone started ringing. The name on the screen was Emma. At first, Michael smiled. He thought it was just a normal call from his daughter. Maybe she wanted to talk about her day. Maybe she needed his advice. Or maybe she simply wanted to hear his voice. But the moment he answered, he knew something was different. "Hey, sweetheart. Everything okay?" Michael asked. There was silence on the other end. Not the kind of silence that happens when someone is thinking about what to say. It was the kind of silence that comes when someone has been carrying something heavy for a very long time. "Dad," Emma finally whispered, "I need to tell you something." Michael sat up straight. He had heard fear in people's voices before. He had seen it on the basketball court when players faced impossible moments. But hearing it from his own daughter felt different. It immediately changed everything. "Emma, what happened?" he asked. "Are you okay?" "I'm okay right now," she replied softly. "But I don't know if you'll look at me the same after you hear this." Those words stayed with him. For a man who had faced some of the biggest challenges in sports history, this was a moment where he had no idea what to do. He could not prepare for it. He could not practice for it. He could not win it with determination alone. All he could do was listen. "Emma, whatever it is, you can tell me," Michael said. "Nothing you say will ever change the fact that you're my daughter." But Emma still struggled. She had spent years trying to find the right moment, years wondering if telling the truth would bring her closer to her father or create a distance she could never repair. She had imagined this conversation so many times, but now that the moment had arrived, the words felt impossible to say. "Dad, I don't want to do this over the phone," she said. "I need to see you face to face." Michael looked around the quiet room. Suddenly, all the awards around him felt meaningless. The trophies, the records, the fame, none of those things mattered compared to the fear he heard in his daughter's voice. "Tell me where you are," Michael said immediately. "I'll come to you." "No," Emma answered. "I'll come tomorrow." There was something in her voice that told Michael she had already made this decision. She was not running away anymore. She was finally ready to open a door she had kept closed for years. Before ending the call, Emma took a deep breath. "Dad?" "Yeah?" "I just need you to promise me one thing." "What?" "Please don't try to fix everything before you hear the whole story." Michael closed his eyes. Those words hurt because they made him realize something. Maybe his daughter was not afraid that he would reject her. Maybe she was afraid that he would not understand her. "I promise," he said quietly. "Tomorrow, I'll just listen." The call ended. Michael stayed sitting in his office, holding the phone in his hand. For several minutes, he did not move. The man who had faced hostile crowds, championship pressure, and impossible expectations suddenly felt powerless. Because this was not about basketball. This was about his little girl. The same little girl who used to run toward him after games. The same child who once held his hand and told him she wanted to be just like him. The same daughter whose smile he remembered so clearly. But now he was wondering something that terrified him. How much pain had she been carrying while he thought everything was okay? That night, Michael Jordan did not sleep. For the first time in a long time, he was not thinking about his past victories or his public image. He was thinking about one conversation with his daughter and the possibility that she had been waiting years for him to truly hear her. Tomorrow, everything would change. Michael Jordan had spent most of his life knowing exactly what to do when pressure came. When the game was on the line, he trusted himself. When millions of people expected him to win, he found a way to push forward. But that night, sitting alone in his house, he faced a kind of pressure he had never felt before. There was no crowd cheering, no scoreboard, no final shot to take. Just silence. After Emma's phone call ended, Michael remained in his office for a long time, staring at the same spot on the wall. The words she said kept replaying in his mind. "I don't know if you'll look at me the same after you hear this." He could not stop thinking about that sentence. What could his daughter possibly be carrying that made her afraid to tell him? What had happened in her life that made her feel she needed permission to be honest with her own father? Michael finally stood up and walked through the house. The lights were dim. Every room felt different that night. The house that once felt full of memories suddenly felt quiet and unfamiliar. As he walked down the hallway, he stopped in front of family pictures hanging on the wall. There was Emma as a little girl, smiling with missing teeth. There was Emma holding a basketball almost as big as her body. There was Emma standing beside him after one of his games, looking at him like he was the greatest person in the world. Michael touched one of the pictures. He remembered how much she loved him. But now he wondered if he had loved her in the way she truly needed. Because being there physically was not always the same as being there emotionally. And that realization hurt. Michael sat down on the couch and closed his eyes. Suddenly, memories from years ago started coming back. He remembered Emma waiting for him after games. She would sit near the locker room entrance, wearing one of his old jerseys, holding a small drawing she made for him. She never cared about the score. She never cared about whether he scored 20 points or 50 points. She only cared that her dad came home. "Daddy, did you win?" young Emma would ask. Michael would smile and say, "Yeah, we won." But sometimes he forgot the question she really wanted to ask. "Did you have time for me?" One memory hit him harder than the others. It was a simple morning, no cameras, no reporters, no pressure, just Michael and Emma in the kitchen. When Emma was young, they had a small tradition. Every Saturday morning, they would make pancakes together. Emma would stand on a chair because she was too short to reach the counter. She would carefully mix the batter while Michael pretended she was the real chef. "These are going to be the best pancakes in the world," she would say proudly. Michael would laugh. "Better than mine?" "Yes," Emma would answer without hesitation. Those mornings were not special because of the pancakes. They were special because Emma had her father all to herself. But as the years passed, the tradition slowly disappeared. More games, more business, more responsibilities. Michael told himself he was working hard for his family, and he was. But he never realized that sometimes children do not remember what you bought for them. They remember the moments when you stopped everything just to be with them. Michael walked into the kitchen, the same kitchen where those mornings happened. Everything looked almost the same, but the memories felt different now. He opened a cabinet he rarely used. Inside were old family items that had been stored away for years. Then he saw something, a small handmade kitchen towel. The edges were uneven. The stitching was not perfect. It was clearly made by a child's hands. Michael picked it up. On it were simple words written in colorful letters. "Dad, remember breakfast with me." He froze. For a few seconds, he could not breathe. He remembered Emma making it for him when she was young. She had given it to him proudly, expecting him to hang it somewhere in the kitchen, and he remembered saying, "I love it, sweetheart. I'll put it right here." But somehow, over time, it ended up forgotten in a cabinet, just like the promise behind it. Michael sat down at the kitchen table, holding the towel in his hands. The tears came quietly, not because he thought he was a bad father, but because he realized his daughter had been asking for something so simple. Not fame, not money, not a perfect life. Just breakfast, just time, just him. That night, Michael Jordan understood something that no championship had ever taught him. Winning in front of the world did not mean you had won everything that mattered. A person could be celebrated by millions of people and still miss the quiet moments that mattered most to the ones they loved. He looked at the message one more time. "Dad, remember breakfast with me." After all these years, those words were still waiting for him. And for the first time, Michael realized that maybe tomorrow's conversation with Emma was not about a secret she had been hiding. Maybe it was about a pain he had never noticed, and he was determined that this time he would not miss it. The next morning, Michael Jordan woke up after a night when sleep never truly came. He had spent hours sitting in the dark, replaying Emma's voice in his mind. The words she said were simple, but they carried a weight he could not ignore. "I don't know if you'll look at me the same after you hear this." Those words stayed with him because they revealed something he had never considered. His daughter was not worried about what he would do. She was worried about how he would see her. For most of his life, Michael had been the person people depended on when things became difficult. He was the man who took the final shot, who carried pressure when everyone else stepped away. But that morning, he realized there was one thing he could not win with determination alone. He could not fix a pain he had never noticed. When Emma's car finally arrived, Michael watched quietly from the window. He saw her park in the driveway, but she did not get out. She sat there with both hands on the steering wheel, staring at the house. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Michael knew that moment was not hesitation. It was fear. Emma was not afraid of walking into a house. She was afraid of walking into a conversation that could change the way her father looked at her forever. Inside that car, Emma was fighting with memories from years ago. She remembered being a little girl who would wait near the basketball court after her father's games. She remembered looking at him with complete admiration, believing he could do anything. But somewhere along the way, admiration turned into pressure. She started believing that because her father was Michael Jordan, she had to be strong all the time. She had to succeed. She had to make him proud. She never wanted him to see the moments when she was struggling. She never wanted him to think his daughter was weak. After several minutes, Emma finally opened the car door and walked toward the house. Michael opened the door before she knocked. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Michael looked at his daughter and saw something he wished he had noticed sooner. She was still Emma, the same daughter who used to laugh at his jokes, the same child who used to run into his arms. But now, behind that familiar smile, there was a sadness he had never seen. "Dad," Emma whispered. Michael stepped closer. "Come here, sweetheart." The moment she heard those words, Emma's emotions broke. She walked into his arms and hugged him tightly. It was not a normal hug between a father and daughter who had simply missed each other. It was the hug of someone who had been holding on alone for too long. Michael felt her shoulders shaking, and his heart sank. Because in that moment, he realized something painful. His daughter was not coming to accuse him. She was coming to him because, despite everything, she still believed he was the one person who could make her feel safe. Michael held her and quietly said, "I'm here. You don't have to carry this by yourself anymore." Those words made Emma hold on to him even tighter, because for years she had convinced herself that she had to handle everything alone. After they sat down in the living room, the silence between them felt heavy. Michael wanted to ask questions. He wanted to know what happened, who hurt her, and how long she had been suffering. Every instinct inside him wanted to jump in and protect his daughter. But he remembered her request from the night before. "Please don't try to fix everything. I just need you to listen." Emma looked at him carefully. "Dad, before I tell you everything, I need you to promise me something." Michael nodded. "Anything. Please don't look at me differently after today." Michael felt his chest tighten, because that sentence told him more than any explanation could. Emma was not afraid of the truth. She was afraid the truth would make her less loved. Michael leaned forward and looked directly at her. "Emma, there is nothing you could ever tell me that would make me stop being your father." She looked away, trying to hold back tears. "But what if you're disappointed?" Michael paused, then he answered, "I might be disappointed that you went through something painful and felt like you had to face it alone, but I could never be disappointed in you for hurting." Those words were exactly what Emma had needed to hear. For years, she had believed love had to be earned. She believed she had to be successful enough, strong enough, and perfect enough to deserve pride. But sitting there with her father, she began to understand something different. Maybe she was loved because she was his daughter, not because of what she achieved. Emma took a deep breath. "Dad, there are things about my life that you don't know." Michael nodded slowly. "I know." "No, Dad," she said softly. "You don't understand. I spent years smiling in front of you while falling apart when you weren't looking." The words hit him harder than anything he had experienced. Michael lowered his eyes, because for the first time, he realized that the biggest moments he missed were not the ones captured by cameras. They were the quiet moments when his daughter needed him and never said a word. Emma wiped her tears and continued, "I don't need you to be the person who saves me today." She looked at him. "I just need my dad to finally hear me." Michael reached for her hand, and with a voice filled with emotion, he said, "Then that's what I'll do. Today, I'm not here as Michael Jordan. I'm not here as someone who has all the answers. I'm just your father, and I'm listening." For the first time in years, Emma felt like she could finally breathe. The secret she had carried for so long was about to come out, and Michael was about to discover that the daughter he thought he knew had been fighting a battle he never saw. For a few moments after Emma told Michael that she needed him to listen, neither of them spoke. The room was quiet, but it was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind of silence that comes before someone finally releases something they have carried for far too long. Emma looked down at her hands, gathering the courage to tell her father the truth. She had spent years keeping these feelings hidden, not because she wanted to deceive him, but because she was afraid of what would happen if she finally admitted that she was not as strong as everyone believed. Michael sat across from her, watching carefully. For the first time, he was not looking at his daughter as someone who had everything. He was looking at her as someone who had been hurting. Emma took a deep breath and began telling him what it was like growing up as Michael Jordan's daughter. She explained that from the outside, her childhood looked perfect. People saw the famous last name, the opportunities, the vacations, and the connection to one of the greatest athletes in history. They assumed she had a life without problems. But what people never saw was the pressure that came with that name. Everywhere she went, people already had an image of who she was supposed to be. She was supposed to be confident, because her father was confident. She was supposed to succeed because her father was a winner. She was supposed to handle pressure because her father had spent his entire career doing exactly that. Emma remembered being young and hearing people say things like, "You must have so much confidence. Your dad is Michael Jordan." But inside, she was often asking herself a different question. What if I'm not enough? She never said that out loud, because in her mind, Michael Jordan's daughter was not supposed to doubt herself. She was supposed to be fearless. She was supposed to have everything figured out. Emma looked at her father and quietly explained that the hardest part was not the expectations from strangers. It was the expectations she created inside herself. Everyone thought I had the easiest life in the world, she said. But nobody ever asked me if I was okay. Those words were difficult for Michael to hear, because he realized something. He had always protected Emma from external problems, but he never noticed the internal battle she was fighting. Emma continued, telling him about the years when she learned how to hide her emotions. She became very good at smiling when she was hurting. She became good at saying the right things. She became good at making sure everyone around her believed she was fine. But when she was alone, everything changed. There were nights when the pressure became too much. Nights when she would lock herself inside the bathroom, sit on the floor and try to calm herself down because she felt like she could not breathe. Her heart would race, her hands would shake, her mind would fill with fear, and even though she felt like she was falling apart, the next morning she would walk outside and pretend nothing happened, because that was what she thought strong people did. They hid their pain. They kept moving. They never let anyone see them break. Michael listened silently as his daughter described moments of her life he never knew existed. Every detail felt like a memory he should have been part of. He thought about all the times he had asked her, "How are you doing?" and how many times she had answered, "I'm fine." But now he understood. Those words did not always mean she was okay. Sometimes they meant, "I don't know how to tell you I'm not." Michael lowered his head. He remembered all the lessons he had given Emma while she was growing up. He had always taught her to fight through challenges. He had told her, "Never quit." At the time, he thought he was teaching her resilience. He thought he was preparing her for life. But sitting there, hearing her story, he realized she had heard something completely different. She heard, "Never admit you are struggling." Emma wiped away a tear. "Dad, I know you wanted to make me strong," she said. "I know you were trying to prepare me for the world." She paused for a moment before continuing. "But somewhere along the way, I started thinking that if I was hurting, I was failing you." Michael looked at her, feeling the weight of every word. Then Emma finally said the sentence she had been carrying for years. "I wasn't afraid of failing, Dad. I was afraid of becoming your disappointment." Those words broke something inside him, because Michael realized his daughter had never been trying to become a champion. She had only been trying to earn the same pride and love she already had. He thought about all the times he had celebrated victories with the world watching, but his daughter had been fighting a battle that nobody could see, and she had been fighting it quietly. Michael reached for her hand. His voice was softer than Emma had ever heard. "I'm sorry you ever felt like you had to hide this from me." Emma looked at him. Michael continued, "I spent my whole life teaching you how to be strong, but I forgot something important. Being strong doesn't mean you never hurt. It means you know you don't have to hurt alone." For years, Michael had believed being a good father meant protecting his children from the difficulties of life. But now he understood something deeper. Sometimes children do not need parents who have all the answers. Sometimes they just need someone who will sit beside them when they do not. Emma never needed Michael Jordan, the legend. She never needed a coach who would push her harder. She needed her father to notice when she was tired. She needed him to see the pain behind the smile. And for the first time in years, Michael was finally seeing the daughter behind the name. After hearing Emma's story, Michael finally understood that the pain his daughter carried did not begin recently. It had been building quietly for years. But as painful as that realization was, there was still a part of Emma's story that she had never told anyone, not even him. The years when she looked the happiest were actually some of the years when she felt the most lost. Emma took a deep breath before continuing. She knew this was the hardest part to explain, because this was the moment when she had come closest to giving up. It happened during her first year of college. For the first time in her life, Emma was away from home. She was no longer surrounded by her family. She was no longer just the little girl everyone knew as Michael Jordan's daughter. College was supposed to be a fresh start, a place where she could discover who she was. But instead, Emma felt like she had walked into a world where everyone already knew her before they knew her name. People looked at her differently. Some admired her. Some were curious about her. Some expected her to be special because of where she came from. And slowly, Emma started feeling like she was living a life that belonged to someone else. She was surrounded by people, but she felt completely alone. She would attend classes, smile at friends, and act like everything was normal. But when she returned to her dorm room and closed the door, the mask disappeared. The pressure she had carried for years came rushing back. She felt exhausted from trying to prove that she was okay. Exhausted from pretending she was stronger than she felt. Exhausted from constantly asking herself if she was enough. There was one night when everything became too heavy. Emma sat alone in her room, staring at the blank screen of her laptop. She had spent hours crying without making a sound, not because of one single event, but because years of hidden emotions had finally caught up with her. She opened a blank document and began writing. At first, she did not even know what she wanted to say, but slowly, the words came out. She wrote about how tired she was. She wrote about feeling like she had disappointed everyone. She wrote about how much she loved her family, but how she did not know how to keep pretending she was okay. It was not a letter meant to hurt anyone. It was a letter from someone who felt invisible, someone who wanted people to understand that behind the smile was a person who was struggling. When she finished writing, Emma stared at the screen for a long time. Then she closed the laptop. She never sent the letter, but the fact that she had written it showed how close she had come to losing hope. Michael listened quietly as Emma told him this part of the story. His heart hurt because he realized how close he had been to losing his daughter without ever knowing she was struggling. But then Emma told him something unexpected, something that changed the direction of her entire life. It happened later that same night. Emma was sitting alone in her dorm room when she heard something outside her door. At first, she thought it was just another student walking through the hallway. Then she heard it again. Someone crying. Quietly. The kind of crying someone does when they are trying desperately not to be heard. Emma opened her door slightly and saw a girl sitting on the floor across the hallway. Her name was Grace Parker. Grace was another student at the college. They knew each other casually, but they were not close friends. Emma could have closed the door. She could have told herself that she was already struggling enough. She could have walked away. But something stopped her. Maybe it was because she recognized that pain. Maybe it was because she saw in Grace the same loneliness she had been feeling only moments earlier. Emma stepped outside. She sat beside her. She did not ask 100 questions. She did not tell Grace to stop crying. She simply stayed. And that was exactly what Grace needed. For hours, the two girls talked. Grace opened up about feeling overwhelmed, feeling like she was not good enough, and feeling like nobody would understand if she admitted she was struggling. As Emma listened, something strange happened. She began saying things to Grace that she had never allowed herself to believe. She told Grace that struggling did not mean she was weak. She told her that needing help did not mean she had failed. She told her that one difficult chapter did not define an entire life. And as she spoke those words, Emma slowly realized something. She was not only talking to Grace, she was talking to herself. The advice she was giving was the same advice she desperately needed. For the first time in months, Emma stopped seeing herself as someone who had to be perfect. She saw herself as someone who was human, someone who could hurt, someone who could heal. When the sun began rising, Grace finally felt calm enough to return to her room. Before leaving, she looked at Emma and said something Emma never forgot. "Thank you for staying with me tonight." The next morning, when Emma woke up, she found a small piece of paper outside her door. It was from Grace. There were only a few words written on it. "Thank you for leaving the light on." Emma stood there holding that note for a long time, because she realized something that would change the rest of her life. The night she thought she was at her lowest point, she had actually done something meaningful. She had become the person she needed when she was hurting. She had learned that sometimes people do not need someone with all the answers. Sometimes they just need someone willing to sit beside them in the darkness. And sometimes, one small light is enough to help someone find their way back. Years later, when Emma created the Porch Light Project, that memory would become the foundation of everything she believed, because she knew something most people never understood: a single conversation, a single moment of kindness, a single person choosing not to walk away, could save a life. After telling Michael about the darkest period of her life, Emma continued explaining how that painful chapter eventually became the reason she found her purpose. She told him that the night she met Grace changed the way she looked at suffering. For years, she believed pain was something people had to hide, because admitting they were struggling meant they were weak. But after sitting beside Grace that night, she learned something completely different. Sometimes, the people who look the strongest are the ones quietly fighting the hardest battles. After graduating from college, Emma knew she could not forget the people who were still sitting alone in their darkest moments. She kept thinking about the teenagers who felt trapped, the ones who were afraid to tell their families they were struggling, and the ones who believed nobody would understand them. She remembered how she felt when she was younger, surrounded by people but still feeling completely alone. And she made a promise to herself: no young person should ever have to feel like there is nobody listening. That promise became the beginning of the Porch Light Project. Emma chose that name because of something simple but powerful. A porch light has always been a symbol of home. It tells someone walking through the darkness that there is still a place where they are welcome. It tells a person who feels lost that they are not forgotten. To Emma, the organization was not just about providing support. It was about reminding people that even during their worst nights, someone was willing to leave the light on for them. When Michael heard about the organization, he was surprised by one thing. Emma never used the Jordan name. She could have easily introduced herself as Michael Jordan's daughter. She could have attracted attention, received donations immediately, and turned the organization into a national project overnight. But she refused. Michael asked her why she never mentioned their family connection. Emma explained that she did not want teenagers to come to the organization because of a famous name. She did not want them to feel like they were entering a place built around celebrity or publicity. She wanted them to feel safe. She wanted the first thing they noticed to be compassion, not fame. "Dad, if someone calls us at 2 in the morning because they feel like they have nowhere else to go, the last thing they should worry about is who I'm related to," Emma told him. That answer stayed with Michael, because he realized his daughter had created something that had nothing to do with his success. It came from her own pain, and that made it even more meaningful. Over the years, the Porch Light Project became a place where teenagers could finally say the things they were too afraid to say anywhere else. Some called because they were dealing with anxiety. Some were struggling with family problems. Some felt like they were carrying responsibilities far beyond their age. Many of them did not need someone to tell them what to do. They just needed someone to answer. Emma remembered one message more than any other. It came from a teenager who had called during one of the hardest nights of their life. The message was simple: "Thank you for answering when nobody else did." Emma kept those words with her because they reminded her why the organization existed. She knew exactly what it felt like to sit alone with overwhelming thoughts, wondering if anyone would notice. She knew what it felt like to smile during the day and struggle in silence at night. And that was why she built a place where people did not have to pretend anymore. As Michael listened to his daughter explain everything she had built, he felt something he had not felt in a long time: pride. Not the kind of pride a father feels when a child wins an award or achieves success. A deeper kind of pride. The pride of realizing that his daughter had taken the pain that almost broke her and turned it into something that could save others. Michael spent his life inspiring millions of people on the basketball court. But now he was sitting across from his daughter and realizing she had been doing something just as powerful. She had been giving people a reason to stay. As Emma continued telling her story, Michael began to see a side of his daughter he had never known. He had always thought of Emma as someone who had everything she needed: a loving family, opportunities, and a future filled with possibilities. But now he realized that behind the organization she built was a young woman who had sacrificed almost everything to keep a promise she made to people who felt forgotten. The Porchlight Project started with a simple idea, but keeping it alive was much harder than Emma expected. The number of teenagers reaching out continued to grow, but the resources were not enough to support everyone who needed help. Every week brought new challenges. There were bills to pay, counselors to support, technology costs, and countless messages from young people who needed someone to answer. Emma refused to turn anyone away. She knew what it felt like to be the person on the other side of the door, hoping someone would notice. She could not bring herself to tell a struggling teenager that there was no room for them. So she started making sacrifices. She worked longer hours than anyone else. She stayed up late answering messages and reviewing cases. She used her own savings to keep the organization running when funding was not enough. There were days when she skipped meals because she was too busy, and nights when she slept only a few hours before starting again the next morning. People around her told her to slow down. They told her she could not save everyone. But Emma understood something they did not. To some people, the Porchlight Project was an organization. To her, it was a promise to the younger version of herself who once sat alone in a dark room, wishing someone would understand. When Michael heard how much Emma had been carrying alone, his first reaction was exactly what she expected. He wanted to help. He wanted to solve the problem immediately. After all, money was something he could provide. He had spent his life building businesses and creating opportunities. If the organization needed resources, he could give them. But when Michael offered to step in financially, Emma gently stopped him. She looked at him and said, "Dad, this is not only about money." Michael was surprised. Emma continued, explaining that money could keep the doors open, but it could not create the trust these teenagers needed. "They don't call because they need a celebrity," she said. "They call because they need someone who understands what it feels like to be alone." Those words made Michael realize that Emma had built something much deeper than a charity. She had built a place of safety, a place where people did not have to hide their pain. But then Emma became quiet. Michael noticed the change in her expression. The conversation was no longer just about the organization. There was someone else, someone who had made Emma especially worried. "Dad, there's one person I need you to know about," Emma said. Michael looked at her. "She's 15 years old." Emma reached for her phone and opened a picture. The moment Michael saw the girl on the screen, something inside him changed. The girl was young. She had a quiet smile, but there was sadness behind her eyes. Michael stared at the picture longer than he expected. There was something familiar about her, something he could not explain. "Who is she?" Michael asked. Emma looked at him carefully before answering. "Her name is Olivia Miller." Michael looked back at the picture. He did not know why, but his heart suddenly felt heavy. He had spent his entire life trusting his instincts. On the basketball court, he could sense a moment before it happened, and now, looking at Olivia's face, he felt the same strange feeling, like a part of a story he did not know was finally beginning to reveal itself. Emma noticed his reaction. She knew this was the moment everything would change, because Olivia was not just another teenager helped by the Porchlight Project. She was the reason Emma had been carrying another secret, a secret that would change Michael's understanding of his own family forever. Michael continued looking at the picture on Emma's phone. At first, he could not understand why he was unable to look away. It was just a picture of a teenage girl, a girl who looked quiet, someone who seemed to be carrying more sadness than a person her age should have to carry. But there was something about her. Something in her face felt familiar, especially her eyes. Michael had spent decades looking into the eyes of people before important moments. He knew the difference between confidence, fear, determination, and pain. And when he looked at Olivia, he saw something he recognized, a feeling he could not explain. It was not just sadness. It was a kind of loneliness, the kind that comes from someone who has spent years wondering where they belong. "Why does she look so familiar?" Michael asked quietly. Emma looked at him for a moment. She knew this was not going to be easy. Before revealing the truth, she wanted Michael to understand Olivia's story, not just see her as a person connected to a secret from his past. Because Olivia was not a mystery to be solved. She was a young girl who had spent her entire life trying to understand why something always felt missing. Emma explained that Olivia's childhood had been completely different from the life people imagined when they heard the word family. Olivia grew up moving from place to place with her mother, Sarah Miller. There were years when Sarah struggled to provide stability. They changed homes often, lived with uncertainty, and learned how to survive without knowing what the future would look like. Sarah did everything she could for her daughter. She worked hard. She protected Olivia. She made sure Olivia knew she was loved. But there was one question Sarah could never fully answer, a question Olivia carried with her as she grew older. "Why doesn't my father want me?" As a child, Olivia would look at other families and wonder what it felt like to have a father who showed up for birthdays, school events, and ordinary days. She did not dream about money. She did not dream about fame. She only wanted what every child wanted, to feel chosen. Sarah tried to explain that life was complicated, but Olivia interpreted the silence differently. To her, silence felt like rejection. She believed her father knew about her and chose not to be part of her life, and that belief shaped the way she saw herself. Emma told Michael that Olivia had spent years feeling like she was missing a piece of herself. She struggled with anxiety. She questioned her own worth. And many times, she wondered if anyone would truly understand what she was going through. That was when the Porchlight Project became part of her life. Emma first met Olivia through the organization. At the beginning, Olivia was just another teenager reaching out for help. She did not know Emma's family background. She did not know Emma's last name carried a history known around the world. She only knew that when she talked to Emma, she felt heard. For the first time, someone listened without judging her. Emma became the person Olivia called when things became too overwhelming. The person who answered late-night messages. The person who reminded her that her life mattered. Over time, their relationship became stronger. Olivia trusted Emma more than almost anyone. And that was the part that made Emma's voice become heavier. Because she had no idea. She had spent years helping this girl survive. She had comforted her through her darkest moments. She had encouraged her when Olivia felt like giving up, but she never knew the truth. She never knew Olivia was connected to her own family. She never knew that the girl she was trying to save was actually her little sister. Michael remained silent as he listened. His eyes moved back to the picture. Suddenly, everything felt different. This was no longer just the story of a teenager who needed help. This was a story that somehow reached into his own past, a past he thought he understood. Emma noticed the confusion on his face. She knew there was no easy way to say what came next. The truth she had discovered would change the way Michael looked at Olivia forever, and it would force him to face a chapter of his life he had long forgotten. For several moments, Michael did not say anything. He continued looking at Olivia's picture while Emma sat quietly across from him. She could see the questions forming in his mind, but she also knew this was not a moment where answers could come quickly. Because before Olivia became part of his present, there was a chapter of his past that he had buried for decades. A chapter from a time when nobody knew his name. Before the championships, before the fame, before millions of people around the world knew Michael Jordan as a basketball legend. There was just Michael, a young man chasing a dream, trying to prove himself, and still figuring out who he wanted to become. And during that time, he met Sarah Miller. Michael remembered her immediately. She was not someone connected to his fame or success. She knew him before the world started calling him a superstar, before people wanted pictures with him, before his name carried the weight it carried later in life. With Sarah, he was simply Michael. They met during a period when his life was changing quickly. His basketball career was beginning to take off, and everything around him was moving faster than he could understand. There were dreams, excitement, and uncertainty all happening at the same time. Their relationship was not long, but sometimes a short moment in someone's life can create consequences that last forever. Michael had no idea that those few months would eventually lead to a daughter he never knew existed. A daughter who would grow up wondering why he was never there. Emma looked at her father as he searched his memory. "Dad, her name is Sarah Miller," she finally said. The name hit him, not like a shock, more like a door opening to a room he had not entered in years. Michael remembered Sarah. He remembered her kindness. He remembered the conversations they shared. He remembered a time when life felt simpler, before every decision was connected to fame, expectations, and public attention. But then Emma told him the part he never knew. Sarah had become pregnant, and she never told him. For years, Olivia grew up believing her father had abandoned her. But the truth was much more complicated. Sarah had made a decision that changed all of their lives. When she discovered she was pregnant, she was scared. She knew Michael's career was beginning to rise. She knew his future was filled with opportunities. She also knew how quickly the world could judge people. Sarah worried that if she contacted him, people would assume the worst. She feared they would think she was trying to use his name. She feared people would believe she wanted money, attention, or a connection to fame. But more than anything, she was afraid of becoming a distraction in his life. So she made a painful choice. She left. Not because she hated Michael, not because she wanted to punish him, but because she believed disappearing was the only way to protect her daughter and protect the future she thought Michael was meant to have. Michael sat quietly as Emma explained this. The pain on his face was clear, because no matter the reason, one truth remained. There was a little girl who grew up without knowing her father, and there was a father who spent 15 years not knowing his daughter existed. Two lives that should have been connected were separated by one decision made decades earlier. Emma then told him something that made the story even more emotional. Olivia's full name was not just Olivia Miller. Her middle name was Marie. Olivia Marie. Michael looked at Emma. "Why Marie?" Emma took a breath, because this detail showed something Sarah had carried with her all these years. Before Michael became famous, he once told Sarah about his family. He talked about his mother, the woman who shaped his values and the person he admired deeply. He had mentioned that his mother loved the name Marie. It was just a small conversation, a simple memory from a young man who had no idea how meaningful his words would become. But Sarah remembered. Decades later, when she held her newborn daughter in her arms, she chose that name. A small piece of Michael's past survived in Olivia's identity, even though he did not know she existed, even though he was not there. Somewhere inside that name was a connection that had never completely disappeared. Michael looked back at Olivia's picture. The familiar eyes suddenly felt different. They were no longer just a strange feeling. They were a reminder that there was a part of his life he never knew about, a daughter who had grown up without him, a young girl who had spent years searching for answers he never knew she needed. Michael finally understood why Emma had been so careful when telling him this story, because Olivia was not just a secret from the past. She was a person, a daughter, and the truth he was about to discover would change everything he thought he knew about his own family. After hearing about Sarah and Olivia's story, Michael sat quietly, trying to process everything. The idea that he might have another daughter was impossible to fully understand. For decades, he believed he knew every important chapter of his life. He knew the victories, the struggles, the sacrifices, and the moments that shaped him. But now he was facing the possibility that one of the most important parts of his story had happened without him even knowing. Emma could see the emotions on his face. She understood because she had lived with this truth alone for a long time. Before she ever told Michael about Olivia, Emma had spent months searching for answers. She did not want to bring something this serious into her father's life, based only on a feeling or a possibility. She knew this was not just about proving a biological connection. This was about two people's lives, a father who never knew he had a daughter, and a daughter who spent 15 years believing she had been forgotten. Emma started by looking through old records and documents connected to Sarah's story. She wanted to understand the timeline, to know what really happened, and to make sure she was not opening old wounds without knowing the truth. She spoke with Sarah. She listened to memories from decades ago. She looked through old photographs and details from a time when Michael was still a young man chasing his dreams. The more she discovered, the clearer the picture became. Everything connected: the timing, the memories, the story Sarah had carried for years. But Emma still needed one final answer: the DNA test. Because no matter how strong the evidence seemed, she knew emotions could not replace certainty. When the results finally came back, Emma sat alone while reading the report. The words on the page changed everything. The test confirmed what she had feared and hoped at the same time. Olivia Miller was Michael Jordan's biological daughter. Emma stared at the result for a long time. She should have felt relieved. She finally had the answer. But instead, she felt overwhelmed, because now she had to make the hardest decision of her life. Who should hear the truth first? Her father or Olivia? Emma knew telling Michael would change his world forever. She knew he would want to meet Olivia immediately. She knew he would feel the pain of every birthday, every difficult moment, and every year he had missed. But she also knew something else. Olivia deserved to hear the truth from someone who understood her heart, not from a headline, not from a stranger, not from a family conversation she was not prepared for. Emma remembered all the nights Olivia had called her, all the moments when Olivia cried because she felt unwanted, all the times she said she wished she knew why her father never looked for her. And that made Emma afraid, because how could she tell a girl who already felt abandoned that the truth had been hidden from her again? So Emma waited. She wanted to find the right moment, but waiting created another problem. The longer she kept the secret, the heavier it became. Because Olivia trusted her completely. Emma was not just another person helping her. She was the person Olivia believed would always tell her the truth. Eventually, Olivia discovered that Emma knew. And the pain on Olivia's face was something Emma would never forget. It was not anger at first. It was heartbreak, because the person she trusted most had known the answer to the biggest question of her life and had not told her. Olivia felt like the one safe place she had finally found had suddenly become uncertain. She looked at Emma with tears in her eyes. "You saved me when I was drowning," Olivia said. "You were the person who told me I mattered when I didn't believe it myself." She paused, struggling to hold back her emotions. "But you knew the truth about who I was, and you kept me away from it." Those words hurt Emma deeply, because they were true. Emma never wanted to hurt Olivia. She had been trying to protect her. But sometimes, protecting someone from pain can create a different kind of pain. Emma tried to explain that she was scared. She was scared Olivia would feel rejected all over again. She was scared the truth would change everything. She was scared of losing the relationship they had built. But Olivia did not see it that way. To her, the secret felt like another person deciding what she was allowed to know about her own life. And that was the hardest part for Emma to accept. She had spent years helping Olivia find her voice. But in this moment, she had taken away Olivia's chance to choose for herself. Michael listened as Emma told him this part of the story. He saw the guilt in his daughter's eyes. He understood why she made that choice. But he also understood Olivia's pain. Because this was never just about DNA. It was about trust. It was about identity. It was about a young girl who spent her entire life wondering where she came from, and now the truth was finally here. But the truth alone would not heal everything. The next step would be the hardest one. Michael Jordan had to meet the daughter he never knew existed, and Olivia had to decide whether she was ready to let the father she had spent 15 years missing into her life. After Olivia learned the truth about Michael, everyone expected her to feel happy. They thought finding out that her biological father was still alive, that he was someone who could finally give her the answers she had searched for her entire life, would bring her peace. But the truth did not arrive the way people imagined. Sometimes the answer to a painful question does not immediately heal the wound. Sometimes it makes the wound feel even deeper. For 15 years, Olivia had lived with one belief: her father knew about her, and he chose not to be there. That belief had shaped so much of who she became. Every birthday without him, every difficult moment she faced alone, every time she watched other children with their fathers, she carried the same question in her heart. Why wasn't I enough for him to stay? But now everything she believed was changing. She discovered that Michael had never known about her. She discovered that her mother had made the decision to keep the truth hidden. She discovered that the person she had blamed for years might not have been the person who abandoned her. And instead of feeling relieved, Olivia felt lost, because now she did not know where to place all the pain she had carried. If Michael did not know about her, then who was responsible for all those lost years? Why did nobody tell her the truth? Why did everyone around her decide what she was allowed to know about her own life? And the question that hurt the most: if her father never knew she existed, did that mean she was ever truly wanted? Those thoughts became overwhelming. Olivia had spent years believing she understood her own story. Now, in a single moment, everything changed. Her identity, her past, her understanding of love. Everything felt uncertain. She felt like she had spent her whole life looking for a missing piece of herself, only to discover that the piece had been there all along, hidden from her. And that realization was almost impossible to carry. That night, Emma could not stop thinking about Olivia. She knew her sister was hurting. She wanted to give her space, but every instinct told her something was wrong. Emma kept checking her phone, hoping to see a message from Olivia saying she was okay. Hours passed. Then, finally, the phone rang. It was a message. Emma opened it. The words were short, but they immediately made her heart stop. Olivia wrote, "Maybe everyone would be better if they didn't have to worry about me anymore." Emma froze. She had seen messages like this before through the Porchlight Project. She knew the difference between someone expressing sadness and someone reaching a dangerous level of hopelessness. This was not just pain. This was someone who felt like a burden. And Emma knew Olivia needed someone right now, not tomorrow, not after everyone had time to process. Right now. For years, Emma had been the person Olivia called when she felt like she had nowhere else to turn. But this time was different. This time, Emma realized she could not carry this alone. For the first time, she called Michael. Not because she needed money, not because she needed advice, not because she wanted him to fix the situation. She called him because his daughter needed him. She was asking him for the one thing only he could give: a father. Michael answered the phone late at night. When Emma explained what happened, everything inside him changed. The confusion, the fear, the questions about the past. All of it disappeared. There was only one thought in his mind: a 15-year-old girl who felt like she had no reason to stay. Michael went into his office and closed the door. The room was quiet. There were no cameras, no reporters, no championship trophies, no image of Michael Jordan the superstar. Just a father sitting alone, preparing to speak to a daughter who did not know if she wanted to be found. Emma connected the call. For a moment, nobody spoke. Michael knew he had to be careful. This was not the time to explain, not the time to defend himself, not the time to talk about what happened years ago. This was about Olivia. He wanted her to know one thing before anything else. "You don't have to understand everything tonight," Michael said softly. You don't have to forgive anyone tonight. You don't even have to know what you feel yet." He paused. "But I need you to know this. I am here." Olivia stayed quiet. Michael continued. "I'm not calling you because I'm Michael Jordan. I'm not calling because of my name or anything I've done in my life. I'm calling because I'm your father." His voice became emotional. "And I need you to understand something. The world is better because you are still in it." Those words reached Olivia differently, because for so long, she believed her existence was something people had to deal with. A problem, a burden, something that complicated other people's lives. But Michael was telling her the opposite. Her life mattered, not because of who her father was, not because of what she could become, simply because she was Olivia. Michael did not tell her to be strong. He did not tell her to stop feeling sad. He did not give her a speech about overcoming challenges. Because for once, he understood something important. Sometimes people who are hurting do not need someone to tell them how to climb out of the darkness. They need someone willing to sit beside them until they find the strength to stand. So Michael listened. He let Olivia cry. He let her ask questions. He let her be angry. He let her admit that she was confused. And for the first time in her life, Olivia felt something she had been searching for. Someone was not trying to change her feelings. Someone was simply staying. That night did not magically erase 15 years of pain. It did not fix every wound. But it created something Olivia had never truly felt before. Hope. With Emma's support and Michael's promise to be there, Olivia agreed to get professional help and begin working through everything she had been carrying. The girl who once believed disappearing would make life easier for everyone else made a different choice. She chose to stay. She chose to face another day. And for Michael Jordan, that became the most important victory of his entire life. Because this time, he was not winning a championship. He was helping his daughter find a reason to keep going. After the phone call with Olivia, Michael stayed alone in his office for a long time. The conversation kept replaying in his mind. He could still hear the uncertainty in her voice, the pain behind her questions, and the fear of a young girl who had spent years believing she was unwanted. That night, Michael realized something he had never admitted before. There were many things in life he could not change. He could not go back and give Olivia the childhood she deserved. He could not return to the birthdays he missed. He could not erase the years when she needed a father, and he did not even know she existed. For most of his life, Michael had been known as someone who moved forward. He believed in focusing on the next challenge, the next opportunity, and the next goal. But now he was facing a different kind of reality. Sometimes moving forward does not mean ignoring the past. Sometimes it means finally having the courage to face it. Michael sat down at his desk and took out a blank piece of paper. For years, people had written about him. They wrote about his championships, his victories, his determination. They wrote about Michael Jordan, the athlete. But that night, he did not want to write as Michael Jordan. He did not want to write as a legend. He did not want to write as someone the world admired. He wanted to write as a father who had just found a daughter he never knew he lost. At first, the words did not come easily. Michael was used to speaking in front of thousands of people, but this was different. These words were not for an audience. They were for Olivia. He started by telling her the truth, not the version people saw, not the image of a man who always had everything under control, the real story. He wrote about the pressure that came with being called the greatest. He wrote about the expectations that followed him everywhere. People saw the confidence. They saw the victories. They saw the person who never seemed afraid, but they never saw the moments when he questioned himself. They never saw the nights when he wondered if he was doing enough. Michael wrote about losing his father and how that pain changed him forever. He wrote about how losing someone you love can leave a silence that never fully disappears. He admitted that there were moments when he was struggling too, moments when he did not know how to express what he was feeling. For so long, he had believed showing emotions was a weakness. He had spent his entire life teaching people how to fight through difficulties. But now he realized there was something important he had forgotten. Sometimes strength is not pretending you are okay. Sometimes strength is admitting that you are not. In the letter, Michael wrote a sentence that he had never said publicly before. "I spent my whole life teaching people how to win. I forgot to teach them that it was okay to hurt." When he finished writing, Michael sat quietly and read the letter again. For the first time in a long time, he was not protecting his image. He was simply being honest. A few days later, Olivia received the letter while she was getting help at the hospital. When she first opened it, she was nervous. Part of her expected explanations. She expected reasons. She expected someone trying to make the situation easier to accept, because that was what she had experienced most of her life. People making decisions for her. People telling her what was best. But as she started reading, she found something different. She found a father admitting that he did not have all the answers. She found someone who was not trying to erase the past. Someone who was willing to acknowledge the pain it caused. Michael wrote, "I cannot change the years we lost. I cannot give you back the moments you should have had. But I promise you this, I will never waste another moment I am given." Olivia read that sentence several times, because for the first time, someone was not asking her to forget the past. Someone was simply promising to be present in the future. She cried while reading the letter, not because everything was suddenly fixed. It wasn't. There were still questions. There were still wounds. There were still years of emotions that needed time to heal. But something had changed. For the first time, Olivia did not feel like she was fighting for someone to choose her. She felt like someone had already chosen her. That evening, Olivia sat alone with a blank piece of paper. She thought about what she wanted to say. She thought about the anger she still carried. She thought about the confusion. She thought about the strange feeling of missing someone she had only just met. After several hours, she finally started writing. Her response was short. But for Michael, those few words meant more than anything he had ever received. Olivia wrote, "I don't know if I'm ready to call you Dad yet, but today I wanted to try." When Michael read the message, he had to stop for a moment, because those words represented something bigger than forgiveness. They represented trust, a beginning, a small opening in a door that had been closed for 15 years. Michael printed the message and kept it beside his bed, not because it was from his daughter, not because it was proof of their relationship, but because it reminded him of something he had learned too late. The most important victories in life are not always the ones the world sees. Some victories happen quietly, a daughter choosing to stay, a father choosing to listen, a family finding its way back to each other. And to Michael Jordan, those few words from Olivia became more valuable than any championship ring he had ever won. After Michael and Olivia began slowly building a connection, Michael thought the hardest part was finally behind them. He had learned the truth about Olivia's identity. He had heard the pain she carried for years, and for the first time, he felt like he was beginning to become the father she always needed. But Emma knew there was still something else he had to know, something she had been afraid to tell him, because she knew it would hurt. One evening, when they were sitting together, Emma became quiet. Michael immediately noticed the change in her expression. He had learned to pay attention to the things his daughter did not say. "Dad, there's something else about Olivia," Emma finally said. Michael looked at her carefully. Emma explained that Olivia had a serious inherited heart condition. It was something she had been dealing with for years, something that required regular medical attention and careful monitoring. Because Sarah had struggled financially for much of Olivia's childhood, getting the best possible care was not always easy. Michael listened without interrupting, but this time, the pain he felt was different. Before, he had been grieving the years he missed emotionally. Now he was thinking about all the moments when Olivia might have needed him in a way he never knew. He thought about every doctor's appointment he was not at, every moment when Sarah had to worry alone, Every time Olivia faced fear without knowing she had a father who would have wanted to be there. 1,000 thoughts went through his mind. If he had known, if someone had told him, if he had been given the chance, maybe things could have been different. But Michael also knew something important. This was not the moment to search for someone to blame. He did not blame Sarah. He did not blame Olivia. He understood that everyone involved had been making decisions based on fear, circumstances, and what they believed was right at the time. The only thing he felt was the weight of lost years, years he could never get back. Michael looked at Emma and quietly said, "I spent my whole life preparing for things I could control, but this was something I never even knew I had to fight for." For the first time, Emma saw how deeply this affected him, not because his reputation was damaged, not because people might judge him, but because he was realizing there was a daughter out there who had needed him, and he was not there. After learning about Olivia's health, Michael knew there was someone he needed to speak with. Sarah. For decades, there had been a distance between them created by one decision from the past. There were unanswered questions, emotions that had never been discussed, and a story that both of them had carried separately. When they finally met, it was not the dramatic confrontation either of them imagined. There was no anger, no accusations, just two parents sitting across from each other, realizing that their choices had affected the life of a child they both loved. Sarah looked older than Michael remembered, not because of age, because of everything she had carried alone. She explained that when she found out she was pregnant, she was scared. She knew Michael's life was changing quickly, and she feared that telling him would create a situation where people questioned her intentions. She worried people would think she was trying to use his success. She worried Olivia would grow up surrounded by attention for the wrong reasons, so she made the decision to leave, a decision she thought was protecting her daughter. But over time, she realized protection and control are not always the same thing. Sarah looked at Michael and admitted, "I thought I was protecting her from a complicated world. I didn't realize I was taking away a part of who she was." Those words stayed with Michael, because he understood. Both of them had made decisions out of love, but both of them had also created pain without realizing it. Sarah had protected Olivia from a world she feared. Michael had spent years believing there was nothing missing from his family. And somewhere between those two realities was a young girl who grew up searching for answers. Before leaving, Michael wanted Sarah to understand one thing. He was not there to take her place. He was not there to rewrite Olivia's childhood. He knew Sarah had been the one who raised Olivia, protected her, and loved her through every difficult moment. He looked at her and said, "I'm not here to replace you. Olivia already has a mother who loves her. I'm here because she deserves a father too." For the first time in many years, Sarah saw Michael differently, not as the basketball superstar, not as the man whose name was known around the world, but as a father who was trying to make things right. The conversation did not erase the past. It did not bring back the years they lost, but it created something they had not had before: understanding. And for Olivia, that understanding would become the first step toward finally having the complete family she had spent her entire life searching for. After everything Michael had learned about Olivia, about Emma, and about the quiet battles his daughter had been fighting for years, he finally understood the true meaning behind the Porchlight Project. It was not just an organization. It was a reflection of Emma's own journey. Every teenager who reached out for help reminded her of the younger version of herself, the girl who smiled in front of everyone while silently struggling inside. Every message from someone who felt alone reminded her why she started this work in the first place. But Michael also saw something Emma tried to hide. She was exhausted. The organization was growing, but the pressure was becoming heavier. Emma had built something meaningful, but she was carrying too much responsibility by herself. She was trying to save others while forgetting that she also needed support. For Michael, this was a moment when he knew he had to step in, not as a celebrity, not as someone trying to fix his daughter's problems, but as a father who finally understood how much his daughter had been carrying. He told Emma he wanted to provide the resources needed to keep the Porchlight Project alive and help it reach more young people who needed support. But Emma hesitated. She had spent so long protecting the identity of the organization that she worried people would see it differently if Michael became involved. She did not want it to become another famous person's charity. She wanted it to remain a place where ordinary people felt safe sharing their pain. Michael understood her concern, and instead of taking control, he said something that completely changed the way Emma saw him. "This was your dream, before I knew about it. I'm here to support it, not to own it." Those words meant more to Emma than the financial help itself, because for the first time, she realized Michael was not trying to use his power to rewrite her story. He was respecting it. He was not trying to erase the years he missed by suddenly becoming the hero. He was simply trying to be present now. That was the difference. For years, Emma believed her father's instinct was always to solve problems, but now she saw something different. Michael was learning how to stand beside her instead of standing in front of her. And slowly, their relationship began changing. They were no longer just father and daughter trying to repair old wounds. They became partners with the same mission, to make sure nobody had to suffer alone. As the Porchlight Project expanded, Michael agreed to attend a private meeting with the organization's team and supporters. Everyone expected him to talk about success. They expected stories about discipline, winning, and overcoming challenges. But Michael surprised them. Instead of talking about basketball, he talked about pain. He talked about losing his father and the emptiness that followed. He talked about the pressure of being considered the greatest and the loneliness that sometimes came with carrying that image. He talked about the moments when people saw confidence on the outside, but never saw the struggles happening inside. For a man known for always appearing unstoppable, his honesty shocked people. Michael admitted that for much of his life, he believed strength meant hiding weakness. He believed he had to always have the answers, but becoming a father again in this unexpected way taught him something important. Being strong did not mean pretending everything was okay. Sometimes being strong meant having the courage to admit that you were hurting. He looked at the people in the room and said, "For a long time, I thought my job was to teach people how to fight through anything. But I've learned that sometimes the most important thing we can do is remind people they don't have to fight alone." The room became silent, because everyone was seeing something rare. Not Michael Jordan, the champion. Not Michael Jordan, the businessman. Not the person whose name was connected to greatness. They were seeing Michael Jordan, the human being. A father. A person who had made mistakes. A person who had regrets. But also someone willing to learn, change, and become better. And for Emma, watching her father speak that day was a moment she would never forget. She finally understood that Michael was not trying to become the perfect father he thought she needed. He was becoming the real father she had always wanted. Someone who could admit his mistakes. Someone who could listen. Someone who could simply be there. And that was the greatest support the Porchlight Project could ever receive. Not just money, not just resources, but a message from a father to his daughter. "I see what you built. I believe in it. And I'm proud of you." For the first time in many years, Michael, Emma, and Olivia were beginning to build something that felt like a family. The past could not be changed, and the missing years could never be returned, but they were slowly creating new memories together. Olivia was still healing. She was still learning how to trust. She was still trying to understand what it meant to finally have the father she had spent her entire life wondering about. For a while, their biggest challenge was not the outside world. It was simply learning how to become a family. But that peace did not last. One morning, everything changed. A journalist discovered information about Olivia's identity. A story that was supposed to remain private suddenly became public. Within hours, people began talking. The daughter Michael Jordan never knew existed. The secret child from his past. The teenager connected to one of the most famous athletes in history. A deeply personal family matter became a story for millions of people to discuss. And for Olivia, the attention felt terrifying. She had spent her entire life feeling invisible. Now, suddenly, the entire world wanted to know who she was. But they did not know her. They did not know the girl who stayed up at night wondering if she mattered. They did not know the teenager who called the Porch Light Project because she was struggling. They did not know the person behind the headline. All they saw was a connection to Michael Jordan, and that frightened her. When Emma found Olivia, she immediately knew something was wrong. Olivia was sitting quietly, looking through the messages on her phone. Some people were supportive, some were curious, but many were treating her like a story instead of a person. Olivia looked overwhelmed. For years, she had wanted people to know she existed. But now that everyone knew, she felt like she was disappearing in a different way. Emma sat beside her. Olivia finally expressed the fear she had been carrying. "I spent my whole life feeling invisible," she said. "Now I'm scared everyone will only see me." Those words stayed with Emma, because she understood exactly what Olivia meant. People knew Michael Jordan. They knew the legend. They knew the championships, the records, and the success. But Olivia was afraid the world would never take the time to know Olivia. She would always be introduced as something connected to someone else, not as herself. Emma reminded her that her story did not belong to the public. Her life was not a headline. Her struggles were not entertainment. She was still the same person she had always been, the same girl who had survived difficult moments, the same girl who had found the courage to keep going. But Olivia was still afraid, because the world had always been a place where people judged quickly, and she did not know if she was strong enough to handle that judgment. When Michael heard what happened, he immediately understood the situation. He knew there were two choices. He could stay silent and hope the attention disappeared, or he could step forward and protect Olivia himself. For years, Michael had been careful about his private life. He understood the power of the media and how quickly a personal story could become something controlled by other people. But this was different. This was not just his story. This was Olivia's life, and she deserved to know that she was not something he would hide. Michael decided to speak first. He released a statement acknowledging Olivia as his daughter while making one thing clear. Her privacy mattered. Her healing mattered. Her story belonged to her. He did not talk about details from the past. He did not blame anyone. He did not try to defend himself. He simply stood beside his daughter. Michael wrote that Olivia was not defined by the circumstances of her birth or by the years they lost. She was defined by her courage. When Olivia saw the statement, she watched it several times. She expected Michael to talk about himself. She expected him to explain. But he did something different. He protected her. He made the world understand that she was not a mistake. She was not a secret. She was his daughter. The words that affected her the most were simple. "I'm not ashamed of my daughter's struggles. I'm proud of her courage." Olivia sat quietly after hearing that, because those words touched the deepest wound she had carried her entire life. For years, she believed she was someone people had to explain, someone people had to accept, someone who arrived too late and complicated everyone's lives. But Michael's words told her something different. She was not a burden. She was not a problem. She was someone worth standing up for. For the first time, Olivia felt something she had spent 15 years searching for. She felt chosen. Not because of her last name, not because she was connected to a famous person, but simply because she was his daughter. And that was the moment Olivia began to believe that maybe she did not have to spend the rest of her life proving she belonged. Maybe she already did. After Michael publicly acknowledged Olivia as his daughter, the world knew the truth. But there was still one important conversation that needed to happen. The people closest to Michael, the people who had shared his life for years, his family. Michael knew this conversation would not be easy. He knew that bringing Olivia into their lives was not just about telling people a new fact. It meant opening old wounds, answering difficult questions, and asking the people he loved to accept a reality they never expected. The first person he needed to talk to was Laura. his wife. For years, Laura had been the person beside Michael through different stages of his life. She had shared his successes, supported him through difficult moments, and built a family with him. But now, Michael had to tell her something that could change the way she saw their entire relationship. When Michael finally sat down with Laura, he did not try to prepare a perfect explanation. He did not make excuses. He simply told her the truth. He told her about Sarah. He told her about Olivia. He told her about discovering that he had a daughter who had grown up without knowing him. Laura listened quietly. The news was painful, not because Olivia existed, not because Michael had another daughter. What hurt was knowing that Michael had carried such a life-changing secret alone for a period of time before telling her. She felt the weight of the situation, not just as Michael's wife, but as someone who understood that a young girl had spent years searching for something she deserved to have. For a moment, Laura struggled with her emotions. She needed time to process everything. She needed to understand how this happened and how their family would move forward. But even through the pain, one thing remained clear. Olivia was not responsible for the choices adults had made. Laura looked at Michael and said, "I need time to understand all of this, but Olivia should never have to pay for the mistakes adults made." Those words meant a lot to Michael, because they showed the kind of person Laura was. She was hurt. She was surprised. She had questions. But she also understood that a 15-year-old girl deserved compassion before anything else. After talking with Laura, Michael knew the next step would be even more difficult. He had to tell their children. He gathered the family together. The atmosphere was quiet. Everyone could sense that something serious was coming. Michael sat with them and explained that there was someone they needed to meet, someone who was part of their family, someone who had spent 15 years living a completely different life. Then he said the words that changed the room. "You have a sister." Silence followed. No one knew exactly what to say. They had grown up believing they knew their family story. Now they were learning that there was another chapter they never knew existed. A sister who had grown up without them. A sister who had faced difficult moments alone. A sister who had spent years wondering where she belonged. Everyone had their own emotions. Surprise, confusion, questions. But as they thought about Olivia, something became clear. This was not about how the situation affected them. It was about what Olivia had experienced. She had already lost 15 years with her father. She'd already spent enough time feeling like she was alone. One family member finally broke the silence. "She spent 15 years without us," they said. "The least we can do is make sure she never feels alone again." Those words changed the atmosphere in the room, because everyone realized something important. Olivia was not coming into their family to take someone's place. She was not there to replace relationships that already existed. She was simply someone who had always belonged. She was just someone who had not been found yet. The first meeting between the family and Olivia was emotional. She walked into the room carrying the same fear she had carried her entire life. Fear of rejection, fear of being judged, fear that people would see her as a problem instead of a person. But what she found was something she never expected. A family that was not perfect. A family that had questions. A family that was still learning. But a family willing to try. Michael watched quietly as his children welcomed Olivia. And in that moment, he realized something. For years, he thought fixing the past meant finding the right answers. But maybe healing was not about changing what happened. Maybe healing was about choosing what happened next. The years they lost would always be part of their story, but they did not have to define the rest of their lives. For Olivia, this was the beginning of something she had never experienced before, not just having a father, but having a family that wanted her there. And for Michael, it was another reminder that the greatest moments in life were not always the ones celebrated by millions. Sometimes, the most important victories happened quietly, around a family table, with people choosing to stay. Throughout his life, Michael Jordan had walked into some of the most intimidating places in the world. He had stepped onto championship courts with millions of people watching. He had faced the pressure of final games where one mistake could define his entire career. He knew what it felt like to have the weight of expectations on his shoulders, but none of those moments compared to this one. Standing outside the room where Olivia was waiting, Michael felt a kind of nervousness he had never experienced before. This was not a game. There was no strategy. There was no way to prepare. He could not rely on experience, confidence, or instinct, because on the other side of that door was his daughter, a daughter he should have known from the beginning, a daughter who had spent 15 years growing up without him. Michael took a deep breath before walking inside. For a moment, he was not Michael Jordan, the basketball legend. He was just a father meeting his child for the first time. Olivia was sitting quietly when Michael entered the room. She had imagined this moment many times. She imagined running toward him. She imagined finally meeting the father she had wondered about her entire life. But now that he was standing in front of her, reality felt much more complicated. She did not run into his arms. She did not smile immediately. She did not call him Dad. And Michael understood. A part of him wanted to close the distance instantly. He wanted to hug her, tell her everything would be okay, and make up for all the years they lost. But he knew this moment was not about what he wanted. It was about what Olivia needed. She had spent her whole life waiting for answers. She had spent years protecting herself from disappointment. She did not need a stranger trying to become her father overnight. She needed time. So Michael stayed where he was. He gave her space. And that simple act meant more to Olivia than he realized, because for once, someone was not forcing her to feel something before she was ready. The first few minutes were quiet. They talked about simple things, small things, things that two people who were strangers would normally talk about. But beneath every word was something much bigger. A father and daughter trying to understand how to begin a relationship that should have started 15 years earlier. Eventually, Olivia looked at Michael and asked the questions she had been carrying for years. Not questions about money, not questions about fame, not even questions about why he was not there. The questions were deeper. The questions were about whether she would ever be enough. "What if I'm not successful?" she asked. Michael looked at her carefully. "What if I disappoint you?" She paused. "What if I'm nothing like the daughter people expect me to be?" Those questions hurt Michael more than any accusation could have, because he realized Olivia was not only afraid of losing a father, she was afraid of never being good enough to deserve one. She had spent years comparing herself to a name the entire world considered legendary. She thought being Michael Jordan's daughter meant she had to be extraordinary. She thought she had to prove she belonged. Michael moved closer and answered her gently. "You were never born to become someone's expectation." He paused. "You were never supposed to be a version of me." He looked directly at her. "You were born to be yourself." Those words stayed with Olivia, because nobody had ever said that to her before. Most people saw the Jordan name first. They saw the history, the success, the expectations. But Michael was telling her that she did not have to earn her place in his life. She already had it. Michael noticed that Olivia was still holding herself back. He understood why. There were 15 years of missed moments between them. 15 birthdays. 15 years of memories he was not part of. He could not erase that. So instead of promising things he could not change, he promised something he could control. The future. "I know I can't give you back the years we lost," Michael said. "I wish I could, but I can promise you that I won't waste the time we have now." For the first time during their meeting, Olivia looked at him differently, not as a famous person, not as the father from a story she had spent years imagining, but as a person sitting in front of her, admitting that he had missed something important. And that honesty mattered. Then came the moment neither of them expected. Michael slowly lowered himself down so they were at the same eye level, not because he needed to, because he wanted Olivia to see him differently. He was not standing above her as a legend. He was sitting in front of her as a father. That small action broke the wall Olivia had been holding up. All the emotions she had controlled for years suddenly came out. The anger, the sadness, the confusion, the longing, everything. She started crying. Michael did not rush to stop her tears. He did not tell her not to cry. He simply opened his arms. And after a moment of hesitation, Olivia stepped forward. She hugged him. It was not the kind of hug that erased 15 years. Nothing could do that. But it was a beginning filled with forgiveness, hope, and the possibility of something new. Michael held his daughter for the first time, and in that moment, he understood something he had never learned on the basketball court. The greatest victories in life are not always about winning. Sometimes they are about finally finding your way back to someone you were meant to love all along. For 15 years, Olivia had been searching for her father. For 15 years, Michael had not known he was missing a daughter. But now, standing together in that room, they were no longer two people separated by the past. They were a father and daughter, taking their first step toward the future. After the announcement about Michael and Olivia became public, life changed overnight. Before, Olivia had spent most of her life feeling invisible. She was the girl nobody knew, the girl who quietly carried questions about where she came from and why her father was not part of her life. But now, the opposite had happened. Suddenly, everyone knew her name. People who had never spoken to her before knew her story. They knew who her father was. They knew details about her life that she had never chosen to share. For the first time, Olivia was not invisible. But she was not sure if being seen by the entire world was any easier. Returning to school became one of the hardest moments of her life. Before everything happened, school was already difficult sometimes. She had dealt with anxiety, loneliness, and the feeling that she was different from everyone else. But now, walking through those hallways felt completely different. Every step felt like everyone was watching. Every conversation nearby made her wonder if people were talking about her. Every phone held up in her direction made her question whether someone was taking a picture. She knew she could not control what people thought. But that did not make it easier. Because Olivia was not just dealing with public attention. She was dealing with the fear that people would never see the real her. They would not see the girl who loved writing. They would not see the girl who spent nights helping others through the Porch Light Project. They would not see the girl who had fought through moments when she did not think she could continue. They would only see one thing: Michael Jordan's daughter. The first few days back at school were overwhelming. Some students were kind. Some offered support. But others were curious in ways that made Olivia uncomfortable. She heard whispers when she walked past. She saw people looking at their phones. She noticed conversations suddenly becoming quiet when she entered a room. Even though nobody directly hurt her, the feeling of being constantly watched brought back the same fear she had struggled with for years. The fear of not being enough, the fear of being judged, the fear that people would define her before they ever knew her. One afternoon, Olivia sat alone during lunch, feeling like she wanted to disappear. She thought about everything that had happened. A few months earlier, she was just Olivia. Now, her life had become a story people discussed. She wondered if she had made the right choice by letting the world know the truth. Maybe staying unknown would have been easier. Maybe keeping everything hidden would have protected her. But then something unexpected happened. When Olivia returned to class, she found a small, folded piece of paper on her desk. There was no name, no explanation, just a short, handwritten message. She opened it. The words were simple. "I was struggling too. Thank you for making people talk about things we usually hide." Olivia read the note several times. For a moment, she forgot about the cameras. She forgot about the headlines. She forgot about the people who only saw her because of her last name, because someone had finally seen the part of her that mattered, her pain, her courage, her story. That note reminded Olivia of why Emma created the Porch Light Project in the first place. When Emma helped her during her darkest moments, she never treated her like a problem that needed to be fixed. She treated her like a person who needed someone to listen. And now Olivia was realizing that her own story could do the same for someone else. She did not choose the circumstances of her life. She did not choose to become part of a public conversation. She did not choose the years she spent searching for answers. But she could choose what happened next. She could allow her story to become something more than pain. It could become hope. That evening, Olivia called Michael. She told him about the note. She told him that for the first time, she felt like maybe people were not only seeing the famous name connected to her, maybe they were starting to see her. Michael listened carefully. Then he reminded her of something important. The world would always have opinions. Some people would judge. Some people would misunderstand. But the only person who truly needed to know who Olivia was Olivia herself. For years, she believed her story was something she had to hide, something embarrassing, something that made her different. But now she understood something. Her story was not a weakness. It was proof that she survived. And maybe somewhere out there, another teenager sitting alone in a dark room would see Olivia's courage and realize they could survive too. For the first time, Olivia stopped asking, "Why did this happen to me?" And she started asking, "How can my experience help someone else?" That change was the beginning of her becoming more than Michael Jordan's daughter. She was becoming Olivia Jordan, a person with her own voice, her own strength, and her own reason to keep the light on for someone else. After Olivia returned to school and began finding her own voice, Michael realized something important. Their story was no longer just a private family matter. People around the world were watching, but more importantly, millions of families were facing the same struggles they had faced in silence. Parents who did not know how to talk to their children, children who felt afraid to admit they were hurting, families who loved each other but did not know how to express what they were feeling. Michael knew that if he spoke publicly, his words would reach far beyond his own family. But he also knew he had to be careful. This was not his story alone. It was Olivia's story too. He did not want to turn her pain into a public moment. He did not want people to focus on the details of what happened in the past. What mattered was the message behind it, the message that nobody should have to suffer alone. So when Michael agreed to an interview, many people expected him to talk about basketball. They expected stories about championships. They expected memories from his legendary career. They expected Michael Jordan, the athlete. But when the interview began, Michael surprised everyone. He did not talk about winning. He talked about family. He talked about mistakes. He talked about the moments when even the strongest people can feel lost. For the first time, the world saw a side of Michael that was rarely shown. A father who wished he could have done some things differently. A person who understood that success does not protect anyone from pain. Michael spoke about how easy it is for people to look at someone's life from the outside and assume everything is perfect. But behind every person is a story that others may never see. He explained that for years, he believed being strong meant always having control, always having answers, always moving forward. But becoming a father to Olivia taught him a different lesson. Real strength was not pretending nothing hurts. Real strength was having the courage to admit when something does. Then he said something that stayed with millions of people. The greatest victory in life is not proving you are strong. It is having the courage to admit when you need help. Those words spread quickly, because they were not only about Michael Jordan. They were about every person who had ever sat alone with their struggles, every teenager who felt afraid to speak, every parent who worried they had failed, every family that needed a reason to start an honest conversation. After the interview aired, something unexpected happened. The Porchlight Project was overwhelmed with messages. Thousands of people reached out. Teenagers shared stories they had never told anyone before. Parents admitted they had been ignoring signs because they did not know how to respond. Families started having conversations they had avoided for years. People who had been suffering quietly began realizing something important. They were not alone. Emma watched the number of messages continue to grow, and she understood that the organization had become something much bigger than she imagined. It was no longer just a place where people asked for help. It had become a reminder that speaking about pain did not make someone weak. It made them brave. Michael's decision to be honest had given others permission to be honest too. While the world was watching the interview, Olivia sat quietly at home. She watched her father speak about her. At first, she expected to feel uncomfortable. She was still getting used to having her private life known by so many people. But as Michael continued talking, she noticed something. He was not telling the world a story about a mistake. He was not explaining why things happened. He was protecting her. He was making sure people understood that she was more than the circumstances surrounding her birth. Then she heard him say, "My daughter's story is not something to hide. It is proof that people can survive." Olivia stopped the video. She sat there quietly. Those words touched a part of her that had been wounded for years, because for most of her life, she believed her existence was something complicated, something people needed to explain, something that created problems. But Michael was telling the world something different. Her story was not a reason for shame. It was a story of survival. Olivia wiped away tears, not because she felt famous, not because millions of people knew her name. She cried because, for the first time, she felt completely accepted. She felt loved. Later that night, Olivia looked at the small light outside her room, the same idea that inspired the Porch Light Project. A simple light in the darkness, a reminder that someone was there. And she finally understood why Emma had created it. Because everyone needs a light sometimes, even the people who seem strongest, even the people whose lives look perfect from the outside, even Michael Jordan. For years, Michael inspired people by showing them how to win. But now he was inspiring them in a different way, by showing them it was okay to be human. And for Olivia, that was the moment she stopped feeling like a secret from the past. She finally felt like a daughter with a future. Months passed, and slowly, life began to look different for Michael, Emma, and Olivia. The past could not be erased. There were still moments when Olivia remembered the years she lost. There were still conversations they needed to have. There were still wounds that required time to heal. But the difference was that Olivia no longer had to face those moments alone. She continued therapy and worked through the emotions she had carried for so many years. She learned that healing was not about forgetting the past. It was about accepting what happened and choosing not to let it control the rest of her life. For the first time, Olivia began discovering who she was outside of her pain. She was not just the girl who had been abandoned. She was not just Michael Jordan's daughter. She was Olivia, someone with her own dreams, her own voice, and her own future. Emma continued leading the Porch Light Project, but things changed for her too. For years, she had been the person who answered everyone else's calls, listened to everyone else's pain, and reminded others that they mattered. Now, she was learning to accept support as well. She no longer carried everything by herself. She had her family beside her. And Michael changed too. The biggest difference was not something the public could see. It was not a new announcement. It was not something that appeared in the news. It was the small moments, the phone calls, the conversations, the time he spent simply being present. Michael had spent decades proving himself to the world. Now he was finally learning how to show up for the people who mattered most. One morning, something simple happened that meant more than anyone expected. Michael walked into the kitchen and started making pancakes. It was an ordinary morning. No cameras, no interviews, no public attention, just family. As he mixed the batter, he remembered another kitchen from many years ago. A little girl standing on a chair, small hands trying to help. A child who believed breakfast with her father was the most important thing in the world. Emma remembered it too. She stood in the doorway watching him, and for a moment, she was transported back to those mornings from her childhood. But this time, something was different. There was another plate on the table, another chair. For Olivia, When Olivia walked into the kitchen and saw the scene, she smiled. She knew it was just breakfast, but it represented something much bigger. A tradition that had once been lost was being created again. A place that once felt incomplete was finally becoming whole. Emma looked at her father and Olivia sitting together, and tears filled her eyes. Not because the past had disappeared, but because the future finally looked different. The family that had once been separated by silence was now connected by honesty. Later that year, Michael took Olivia to a basketball court. It was an empty court. No fans, no reporters, no pressure. Just the sound of a basketball bouncing against the floor. Olivia looked around and realized this was the place where so much of her father's story had begun. She expected him to teach her how to shoot. She expected him to show her the skills that made him famous. But Michael did not do that. Instead, he simply walked with her. He showed her where he practiced, where he struggled, where he failed, where he learned. He wanted her to understand that before the world knew Michael Jordan, he was just a young person trying to find his place. Someone who had doubts, someone who had fears, someone who also needed people who believed in him. "This place made people think I was strong," Michael told her. "But the truth is, I became strong because there were people who helped me when I wasn't." Olivia listened quietly, because she finally understood something. Her father was not perfect. He never needed to be. She did not need a perfect father. She needed a real one. As they stood together on the court, Olivia looked at Michael. There was still a question she had carried quietly, a question she was almost afraid to ask. "Do you think it's too late to become my father?" For a moment, Michael looked at her. He saw the little girl he never got to know. He saw the teenager who had survived so much, and he saw the daughter standing in front of him now. He smiled gently. "Maybe I was 15 years late," he said. He paused. "But I promise you this." Michael looked directly into her eyes. "I won't be late for another day." Those words meant everything, because Olivia knew he could not give her back the past. No one could. But he was giving her something just as important, a future. The Porchlight Project continued to grow, helping thousands of young people who felt alone. Emma continued reminding others that asking for help was not weakness. Olivia continued sharing her story, not because she wanted attention, but because she knew someone else might need hope. And Michael continued learning the lesson that changed his life forever. The greatest moments were not always the ones celebrated by millions. Sometimes they were quiet. A father making pancakes, a daughter sending a message, a family sitting together, a light left on in the darkness. Because sometimes people do not need someone to save them. Sometimes they only need someone to remind them they are worth staying for. And sometimes, after years of being lost, all it takes is one person opening the door and saying, "You're home." Months turned into years, and the small idea Emma created from her own pain became something much bigger than she ever imagined. The Porchlight Project continued growing, opening new centers in different cities across the country. What started as one person answering a late-night call became a nationwide reminder that no one should have to face their darkest moments alone. Inside those centers were thousands of stories, teenagers who finally found someone willing to listen, families who finally started conversations they had avoided for years, people who once believed nobody would understand them, finally realizing that their pain mattered. Emma often stood in those buildings and remembered the night when she was the one who needed someone to answer. She remembered the fear, the loneliness, the feeling that nobody could see what was happening inside her. And she remembered Grace sitting outside her dorm room, the simple note that changed everything, and the lesson she carried with her ever since. Sometimes saving someone does not require having all the answers. Sometimes it only requires staying. At home, a small porch light continued shining outside Olivia's room. It was a simple light, nothing expensive, nothing extraordinary. But to Olivia, it represented everything that had changed. For years, she thought she was living in the dark. She thought she had been forgotten. She thought she had to prove she deserved to be loved. Now, every time she saw that light, she remembered something different. She remembered the night Michael answered her call. She remembered the first time he told her that the world was better because she was still in it. She remembered the first hug, the first breakfast, the first moment she stopped feeling like a missing piece and started feeling like she belonged. The light was not a reminder of the years they lost. It was a reminder of the years they still had. One evening, Michael stood outside with Olivia, looking at the small light shining in the darkness. He smiled because he finally understood something he had spent his entire life learning. A person's greatest impact is not measured only by trophies, achievements, or how many people know their name. It is measured by how many people feel less alone because you were there. Michael Jordan had spent years teaching people how to fight. But through Olivia, Emma, and the Porchlight Project, he learned another lesson. Sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is admit they need help. Sometimes the bravest thing is telling someone, "I'm not okay." And sometimes the greatest gift you can give another person is simply leaving the light on. Because somewhere, right now, there is someone sitting in the dark, believing nobody would notice if they disappeared. And sometimes, all they need is one sign, one voice, one person willing to say, "You are not alone." The porch light continued glowing, a small symbol, a quiet promise, a reminder that no matter how dark the night becomes, there will always be a way back home.